Hi, everyone. Welcome to journey number 19. Today I have Sunil Godse on, and a really interesting topic that, well, to be honest with you, I didn't know existed. Something called intuitionology, and someone that I'm really excited to talk to here. And just to start off, Sunil, just how you doing today? How's life?
Oh, life is amazing. Today was quite busy. We were just talking a little bit about this earlier, and stuff with other podcasts, meeting with my team, other ideas, blogs. So it's been a full day, but it's an amazing full day.
Amazing. And um, you know, one of the reasons why I'm so excited for this conversation is intuition is something that I've kind of had in the back of my mind my entire life. That's been interesting to me, and it's just kind of been a curiosity of mine. And so I'm really diving into it because I've never, I guess, had a full-on conversation about it. But I guess just to frame up the conversation a little bit, starting off here, can you just give us some context on you? So where you grew up, what you were like as a kid, kind of how you got to where you are today, and then what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, Sunil Godse, ex-engineer, well, had the MBA, did the engineering. I grew up in Winnipeg, Canada, which is really cold, and lots of mosquitoes in the summertime, big ones. I didn't realize they grew that big. And then from there, sort of a conservative town, and then moved to, getting into engineering, and we'll talk about that, and kind of ignoring my interest and do that. Yeah, do my MBA, and then just sort of morphed into entrepreneurship, management consulting, and then it took some time off a bit, just to do the stuff that I wanted to do, and then just really had this burning desire through the experiences I've had, which actually came from my first book, of really scratching the surface on what this thing called intuition is, and the way that you describe it is exactly how it was for me, and I think it's exactly how it is for a lot of people. And they kind of go about life with social media themes saying, I trust your gut, or I always trust my intuition. But nobody's really, basically opened the hood, so to speak, to figure out, okay, how the heck does this thing work? What really is it? And I really need to dive into it because of the experiences I went to, which we'll get into, and the burning desire for me to do. And then so once I had that burning desire, I just kept plowing forward, started intuitionology.com and changed. I've had over a dozen testimonials now. Hundreds of lives have been changed. And I've had a 7-day challenge we'll talk about later, where I've had 54,000 people who come through it just to solve a problem that they have using their intuitive components, and watch their intuition get stronger in 7 days. And how simple the process is. It's really simple. And it's a tool we all have that I don't think people really appreciate. Until now, I'm just shining a light on it, and I'm hoping that your listeners will go away today with a newly found approach to using their intuition, appreciation for what it does, and starting from today, every decision they can make can be the best one, is the right one in any situation. That's how they stop wasting time doing things that take them away from that path to success that they're truly meant to be on.
Love that. And I'm just curious too. It's interesting. It's something that I've thought a lot about, and I always like hearing, kind of, the different paths that people take to get to where they are now. And you talked about doing engineering and then kind of going into that management consulting world. You know, mentioning that you've kind of fell out of passion, or you realized it wasn't for you, and you wanted to pursue this study of intuition. Was it always something with going into engineering, because it's one of those professions of, like, doctor, engineer, lawyer, where it's looked very highly upon by society. Was there a lot of outside pressure that you felt to go into one of those, like a career like that, or was it a matter of you were passionate, you were interested in it originally, and then just over the course of working through it and discovering new things, that you kind of fell out of that? I'm curious around that.
Yeah, and so it's for me, it's the former, not the latter. Certainly, those are different paths to take, and I mean, and research shows that people switch their career 6 times, so you can actually enjoy something, and then in my case, from my biased view, intuitively know to change careers or paths. But for me, it was South Asian male. You're right, and there's actually 4 career doors: it's doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. As a South Asian, especially as a South Asian male, and the key thing you mentioned is the societal norms, or you start listening to other people. And for me, it was exact that, right? I'm an East Indian male. What do East Indians typically do? My dad was an engineer. He was egging me on to become an engineer. But every breadcrumb I had was when it had to do with entrepreneurship. I mean, I remember and my first brush with intuition was when I was 5 years old. There was these video games that my dad that I wanted, and my dad said they're too expensive. And I remember back then a distinct voice telling me, Sunil, go door to door to raise money. And I did. I raised $200. $100 went to my dad, and the other $100 went to charity. So the seed of entrepreneurship was always there. Everything I got into leading up to the, even as a kid, as a young adult, it was entrepreneurial nature. Yet I fell into the societal norm to be the engineer, and I didn't really like it. Soon my intuition caught up to me, and it was just burning to get out, just get out. And that's when I made the decision to actually joined as a private investor in a restaurant. And when I did, I was making 5 times more in dividends doing that than as an engineer full time. And so I quit and sacrificed my dad's relationship. But it was something I needed to do to really, really enjoy what I was doing. And 5, 6 businesses later, $20 million in revenues. I mean, and loving it. It's not about the money, but I just loved every venture that I started, and the people I worked with and people I hired. I was just amazing. And I mean, that's what life should be like.
I love that. And making that switch, would you say, was there like one distinct moment that you remember, kind of like that breaking point, or was it more of that slow build up, and that, that build up of push it, like suppressing all those feelings that you were saying, you felt that entrepreneurship from a very, very young age, and then you suppressed it and suppressed it. So was it kind of that slow burn, or was it, one specific breaking point that you remember where you're just like, okay, I need to make this change?
Yeah, I think the one that I can really remember is when we had opened up the Mexican restaurant. It was also a dance club in the evenings, and it was quite popular. And so I remember going incognito, because normally we come to the back door and go through. And I said, no, I want to see what the customers experience. And I remember, and the car that I had back then was it was just really, it was like a 85 Plymouth Horizon. And so you have to understand, I was an engineer taking this thing in mud puddles, and there's no way I'm taking a nice car. So I've got this dirt bag of a car, and while all the other investors are bringing in Ferraris and Mercedes and things. That there's this Plymouth Horizon. You open the door, goes right, and then I get out, and then the bouncer is like, hey, Mr. Godse, how are you doing? And I said, I'm going to stand in line and watch. And what was really, really just opened up is that this is something that I've got a bit of a footprint on. And look at the enjoyment that these people are having. Look at the smiles in these people as they come to the front door. Look at how my staff are treating them. Look at how much fun everybody's having. And I just felt so there. I mean, this was me. It was just what I wanted to embrace myself with, was giving that type of value to people. And it's, in this case, it was a Mexican restaurant on the higher end, watching people eat and then just talk. And so it's not so much about the food, it's about the experience. And I loved that, and as an engineer, it just didn't call to me. I love the engineering aspect. I loved watching. I was on some construction crews, enjoyed that aspect. I actually helped develop a spreadsheet that saved them $90,000 in overtime. And that was like finding solutions to problems was the entrepreneur, was the management consultant. That was just the burning desire in me. And that's what got me to really move away. And we'll talk about the intuitive signals, but they were just getting louder and louder all the time. And finally, I just had to make the decision, knowing that I'm going to sacrifice my relationship with my dad. That was a really tough conversation, and we didn't speak for a number of years, but we are very close now.
That's good. And yeah, sometimes you just need that time, and that let that wound heal a little bit. And it's nice that,
Yeah.
I think a lot of times it comes back to even the willingness to mend that, right? And having, on both parties, right? And the humility to go back and just like, hey, I still value this friendship
Yeah.
or relationship, whatever it is, right? And being able to go back. Now, one thing I'm curious about too is, you had a lot of financial success very quickly switching those careers.
Mm.
If you had not experienced that financial success right off the bat, do you think that it would have changed your path?
Uh,
Would you have made that jump right then? Would you have done it later? Do you think it might have scared you off? I'm just curious if you've ever reflected on that.
Yeah. So when it comes to financial success, one of the things I continue to say is like, so when I went into entrepreneurship, I really kind of started with, not much. I mean, engineering didn't pay me much, enough for rent. And as a single guy kind of going out and being with friends, there wasn't really much at the end of the day. But what really solidifies this point really home, I think, for those looking to either start their own businesses or do something, is that when I made the switch to management consulting, I got a chance to get a really big contract in Silicon Valley, and it was massive. And but the contract terms kept changing, and again, this is where those some things were coming. My intuition was saying, back off. And I didn't. I was so emotionally involved that I went down there and spent every single penny to move, and the company didn't pay me. And I was about to be married a couple of years. Luckily, my wife was in India at the time, and I remember coming up to Canada with 23 cents in my bank account, and starting over. And she's phoning to say, "How are things going?" I say, "Great." And I just don't know where I'm going to be sleeping that night. So that starting from there and then using my intuition to reach the people that I trusted, not necessarily my inner circle. There was actually one particular person that I had met at she was teaching a course and she was the instructor, and I knew her background and I just reached out to her. I didn't have a solid relationship with her at all, but my intuition had her picture come up in my head. And a couple of days later, I reached out to her, walking into her office. I told her exactly what had happened. And she was on the phone, and she gave me, three opportunities the very next week for six-figure opportunities. And then I started putting the money back in the bank account. But I do remember just walking the streets. This is Calgary, Canada, of nothing. But what I had was me. What I had was my decisions. And there's a particular point where I just remember walking, and I had no friends around me. I had little to no money, but I was happy. For some reason, I was just happy because I'm taking the steps to improve my life. I'm reaching out to these people. At that point, I didn't have those opportunities in place, but I was just really happy with who I was. And I think that's the essence when you are coming from that place as a business owner, an entrepreneur, or personally in life. Uh, I mean, there's nothing like it. It was just sort of this solid. It's like having shields around you, right? And what you do is you repel the caustic people out. You self-select those people that can come in, and I think life is just so grand. I mean, from my perspective, and then the opportunities start coming, one door after another door after another door, and then I start building up the portfolio and the money and the jobs, the people I meet, and the experiences. And that's what happens when you trust your intuition. Is those doors of opportunity start presenting themselves.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's something that I've had to learn for myself and really has sunk in, call it over the last year and a half, that financial success and happiness are completely independent of one another.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're too far apart. And one of the famous things I say, I'm famous for me, I guess, is I think it's famous, is when you take care of the inputs, the outputs take care of themselves. So you worry about what you're going to do in the moment, and when you can do that, then those outputs come, and those outputs are motivations or things or goals that are very intrinsic in nature. You have to make sure that these are inside. You don't, it's not about the Lamborghini or the flash and dash and the big home. And you yourself will know whether you may say or you may tell others, "I'm doing it because I want to," but internally your intuition knows exactly what your intention is. So if your intention is for like a window to make others feel like you're successful, you'll know, right? You can lie to me and everybody else, but you can't lie to yourself. And when you live life based on that, that means you don't trust yourself. When you don't trust yourself, you don't trust your own values. You put the values or judgments in others, like society or people who don't have your intentions right at hand. That's when you ignore those signals that intuition is sending you. And then this is when we've got four intuitive hurdles we can get into later on, but they pummel you because you're in a weakened state. When you're in a weakened state, they've got you with prey, just saying, "I'm going to get this one." And that's when you stray away from the path that you're meant to be on.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And, as I was reflecting and kind of thinking about this conversation, I realized how much of my life I I always say too, I play on two extremes. I play on the extremes all the time. And so much,
Yeah.
especially professionally, my life is just driven by completely by intuition, where, over and again, it is, I put myself in these situations where there's no clear outcome, there's no clear financial gain or plan, but there's just something that tells me I can learn a ton from this. I don't know what the destination is, but this is where I think I should be right now. I think this is where I'll learn and grow the most. And I'm just going to be open to whatever comes, and also be okay with the downside, because for me, that's a big one. And I'm taking a look at it and going, okay, if I go, what is the worst case scenario? Am I okay with that? Yes. Okay, let's go and let's figure it out. And so, kind of building off of that and talking about intuition, how do you define intuition? Because I think it's a word that's thrown around a lot, but everyone has kind of their own idea of what it is. But like, how would you define intuition for people?
Yes, that's a very good question, and it's a difficult one to answer, and I'll tell you why. When I first started researching intuition, and so I told you about the engineering, the management consulting contract, but the trigger that got me to really take a deep dive, on top of knowing that I heard it when I was 5 years old, and these other two things, is I remember when I was in engineering, I had a good friend of mine reach out. I was doing personal coaching at the time, and she was being stalked by someone. And she said, Sunil, I need your advice. And there's, again, this something, intuition was reaching out to me and saying, meet with her that afternoon. And for some dumb reason, I said, yeah, I wasn't busy. I had this open space. I just said, let's meet a couple of days later. And what happened is the very next day, that same stalker walked up to her at a bus shelter and put a bullet through her head, and killed her. And so now I'm thinking, I really need to figure out why I ignored this thing called intuition, and really, really kind of open the hood to figure it out, just because I never want that to happen to me again. And so now I've lost time, effort, money, and now a good friend based on this thing that I'm not listening to. And so I started the same question you had. So is there a definition? And so I couldn't find one. When I was going online, it was all about manifestation, voices from God. And it's great that other people see it that way, but that didn't resonate with me. And so I went online to some online dictionaries. Man, they kind of talked around it. And I said, yeah, okay, but it still doesn't resonate with me. And I remember these signals that intuition was sending me. And I remember in my social contacts, there was this intuitive channeler that I remember seeing a social media post from, and she talked about intuition and signals. So I said, okay, let me go interview her to see if she can enlighten me on a definition. So she talked about intuition from an energy perspective. And I really resonated with that, because in my engineering days, you look at steel, for example, it has both mass and an energy-like or wave-like property. And so I now was thinking as intuition is kind of like a blend of art and science. And so I got the art part, which are these signals, and she touched upon the energy part and said, yeah, that makes sense to me now. It's resonating. But what she said is that we have a belief system that we don't want to believe that it exists. And the research is just not there yet. And I said, well, that's really interesting, because I'm thinking, if this has happened to me so many times, and incidentally, the whole reason for me to focus on intuition was after my first book called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster, where 80 to 90% of those executives talked about ignoring their intuition, ignoring their gut. They should have known. They made the wrong decision, but they knew what it was. 80 to 90% of business executives, after close to 300 interviews, are saying the same thing. Why is there no research on this? It just baffles me. And so I said, okay, who can give me a scientific explanation? And so I think, okay, I know this neurologist, Dr. Rathbone. Let's go interview him. So I take my camera and a camera crew come out, and I don't know what I'm expecting. I'm expecting him to say, yeah, this kind of research, I'm not sure. So I'm expecting this to be like a 5-minute conversation, and I flip on the camera and ask him, does intuition exist? And thinking, oh, I only put about a half an hour in the parking meter. This will be good because I have lots of time, and maybe give someone else 20 minutes. And next thing you know, he says, it absolutely exists. He goes on to explain it from a neurological perspective, how the neurons go into the gut. That's why we talk about a gut feeling. And he uses it for his patients. If his patients say something feels wrong, he absolutely believes them. He uses evidence-based medicine to find out what's wrong. He doesn't ignore it. And when he's had bad things happen. And the key thing that he told me was that there's a lot more neuroscience research that's coming out that's saying that intuition is becoming more and more increasingly happening earlier than we consciously know of it happening. And okay, so now I've got the art and science, and I'm thinking, wow, so now there is science. And so now I have a definition. And so I went to an academic database to see, okay, what type of research is out there. I start typing the word intuition, and I'm thinking, what, maybe 10, 12 articles, thousands and thousands of articles on intuition. And there's one of them was saying that, well, there's a reason why I couldn't find a definition, is because scientifically, your intuition hits the amygdala. That's the primitive part of the brain. There's no language associated with that. So when we have this thing called intuition, we individually put our own definition around it. So you and I can describe it totally differently, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so my definition was art and science. Yours could be a voice of God. Yours could be just experience, and it doesn't really matter. And so that was why I couldn't find a definition of intuition. And I remember when I was thinking about when I was 5, are we born with it? And sure enough, there was a research article that said that infants as young as 2 months old have been shown to have intuitive tendencies, or they call it intuitive physics in the paper. And so there's that. And then there's a paper that said that intuition actually happens on average 7 to 10 seconds before we take an action or make a decision. So now what Dr. Rathbone was saying is now making sense. And so and then MRI, brain scan after brain scan, is subconscious in nature. It's all coming up. And the other thing I discovered is, after interviewing over 1,000 people, the signals that we get are of two types. There's positive signals and negative signals. Obviously, the positive signals are the ones that tell you that you're making the right decision. And the negative signals are telling you that you're making the wrong decisions. But what's particular about the negative signals is that they actually start very subtle in nature. And these are the ones that we miss. The subtle ones are the ones that are telling us to kind of back away. And we've all experienced this. If we walk into a room or a situation or an alleyway or a building or something, we all look and say, something's off. It could be internal thoughts, but every single person has had that experience. That's your intuition saying, that warning you that something in that scene is off. And so either walk with caution or back away. It's going to tell you, well, you'll know what action to take, because if you walk ahead, another signal is going to say, no, I told you to back off, back off. And what happens with those signals is, if you ignore the first one, the second one's going to be louder and louder. And sometimes it changes. And I've had people who've told me that they've been in accidents. They were about to kill themselves. They've ended up homeless, as the ultimate signal for them before they actually started trusting their intuition. So the other thing that we have to be careful is that we don't coalesce around, everybody talks about a gut feeling or hearing a voice, which is common terminology, and you were talking about that earlier. But let's say you and I share this signal called this voice that I heard when I was 5. So for you, that voice could be signal number 1. And if it is, that's fantastic, because if it's a negative signal, that's signal number 1. Then when that voice comes, you're not going to move forward. You're going to back away. But for me, if I wait for that voice, that could be, for me, signal number 3. If that's signal number 3, what that tells me is I've missed signal number 1 and 2. That means I've made 2 bad decisions. Mm-hmm. And those 2 bad decisions could be a stub toe, or it could be that I'm headed towards bankruptcy. I just don't know. And so that's how the signals work. They're quite complex. And so normally for everybody except for weirdos like me, we're good with signals, and we can operate intuition just like that. And I'll tell you why I'm a weirdo in a bit. Okay. Outside of my kids telling me that all the time. Intuition is kind of like a car when you're driving a car. And so when you're driving a car, you hear the roar of the engine when you turn it on, or you turn the keys, and then you just drive. You don't really care what's under the hood. So where the weirdness comes in is, I really love to take a look at what's under the hood to really see how does intuition really work. And what I found out is that there's actually 4 types of intuition that all work all at the same time in a split second. And then it sends you these signals to tell you what the decision is. And the best way I can explain this is actually from a non-believer. Okay. And so one of my first interviewees was a fellow by the name of John Rothschild. And this guy's an investment banker. Data, spreadsheets, experience, that's how he was defined in every aspect of his life. So when I called him to say, hey, listen, John, I want to talk to you about intuition, he's like, okay. Because you remember the online stuff at that time was Voices from God and spirituality. And he's just like, I'm not so sure we're going to talk about, Sunil. Come on down. I haven't seen you for a while. We'll chat about intuition for the first 5 minutes. I don't know what we're going to talk about. And for the rest, let's just catch up. I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah.
So, uh, one of the things about signals, and these are sort of the weird things about signals, is that there was one CEO that had this positive signal that was an omen. And so there's no shape, there's no color, but whatever he's doing at the time, whether he's hiring someone or working on a vendor or hiring or bringing on a partner, and this omen comes up, then he continues what he's doing.
Mhm.
And he says yes to whatever is on the table. That's his signal. So I'm telling John about the CEO now, thinking that that's what he'll gravitate to with this omen. And he says, "Yeah, I'd really like to shake the hand of that guy who sees omens, but Sunil, I mean, life is about experiences and decisions, and data, unfortunately." And I said, "Oh, but John, one of the four types of intuition is called experiential intuition." And so if you think about your brain like iceberg, the subconscious part is underwater and the 10% above the conscious part. So when you're born, you've got tons of experiences in terms of formal and informal experiences. You have learning that you've gained, which is formal, like college, university courses, and informal, kind of street smarts. You've got your own experiences and experience of others every single day being put into the subconscious area of your brain, like a library. So when it comes time to making a decision, your intuition already plucks all the relevant pieces from your past to inform you. So when you get a positive intuitive signal or a negative one, your intuition already knows that you can make a decision or you back away from a decision based on what's happened in the past. So that signal is why you should trust it. It's tons of data, tons of experience, tons of learning, all that's coming in a split second. And in some cases, as I was explaining to John, it gets you to go against the data. And he said, "Well, that's funny. I have an experience like that." I said, "Well, tell me about it." So John was in the area of doing. He was in the franchise restaurants kind of thing, and so
Yeah.
whenever there was a 9 out of 10 in terms of franchise location, they would put one there, and they look at things like demographics, development in the area, traffic patterns, things like that. And there was this one area in dilapidated part of Toronto, and they were looking at putting something there, and his team came up with 5.5 out of 10, not even close. But he and his partner walked to this dilapidated area of Toronto. And now we're talking about the second of four, called situational intuition. We talked about it earlier. This is where he looks around and says, I just think we should put a franchise here. And much to the disagreement with the team members, they actually put the franchise location there. And that became the best portfolio of restaurants in his whole chain of portfolios, called the Beer Market, the most profitable for sure. And then John, in his investment banking world, his purpose changed. He stopped wanting to be someone on the sidelines, looking at spreadsheets and advising businesses. He basically said, I'm quoting him, he says, "I want to be a coach.
Yeah.
I want to run a business." His purpose completely changed. And now we're going to get into the third of the four, called relational intuition. Relational intuition filters those people out that aren't in alignment with your purpose or what you want to do. These aren't yes people. These are people that you can trust, are going to come. They're going to be with you in the ups and the downs, and they support you in your journey with the proper and the true intentions. Everybody in John's life that was concerned about money, fame, ego, high-end restaurants, private jets, limousines, all those people were saying, "You're nuts. What is wrong with you?" The one person that believed in his purpose was his wife.
Mm.
So relational intuition threw all the voices and opinions of everybody else out, and he simply asked his wife. And he looks at his wife. Now remember, this is a non-believer.
Yeah.
This is an hour in, and he's saying, he looks at his wife and says to her, and I'm quoting him, "This just feels right."
Yeah.
Now he's using the word intuition in his language. And so then the fourth one is called creative intuition. Creative intuition ultimately helps you with the decision.
Mhm.
So if it's a regular decision, like what am I going to eat? And I'm going to turn left here. Your creative intuition is pretty low. That's right. There's no creativity in it. But when you're doing something that's really against the norm, like John was about to do, the creative intuition was high. So he wanted to run a business, and running successful businesses before, You would think that he would run a business that was, healthy cash flows, good stream of revenues, and a really solid balance sheet from a business perspective. Not his intuition. Tiny, bankrupt little restaurant.
Mm.
And he quit, walked into that tiny, bankrupt little restaurant. That restaurant was Eastside Mario's location number one. And that ended up being over 1,000 locations. Over 20 years, he amassed that to $2 billion with other brand names,
Yeah.
all because it felt right. And when we talk about definition of intuition, all I'm doing is shining a light on his experiences, how he thought intuition was, his signals, his stories, how it was used in his life, his subconscious phenomenon. And when people realize what that is, what intuition is for them,
Yeah.
now they know how it operates, and now they can understand the signals as long as they spend the time to pay attention to those signals. And now they understand how the right decisions are made and how they can avoid making the bad ones that really waste their time. And the other thing is, when you make a bad decision, there's something else you have to think about. It's not just one times the cost; it's two times in something I call opportunity cost. It's not just the cost of making that bad decision; it's also the cost of you not making the right decision,
Yeah.
and that's two times the cost. And so that's how powerful intuition is, and that's what happens when you don't listen to it, when you ignore it. You're really decelerating the amount of success that you could gain.
Yeah.
In that same moment.
Yeah. No, there's so much to break down there, and like, thank you for that. That was super informative. And I think one of the things that stands out the most for me is the mixture of art and science, right? And it's
Yeah.
not all one way or all the other way.
Yeah.
And for me, when I think about my definition of intuition, it's I feel a certain way or I know something, but I don't know why. Right? It
Right.
is just something is there. It's telling me to do something or not to do something, and I'm not sure why. And when I'm thinking about it, the data driven, part of it makes total sense to me. And for me, that's almost the science part as well. Looking at it more, just the causes is that, and again, that iceberg, example makes total sense as well. Of so much subconscious, and there's so much that you're not aware of. Not only that, but your brain works so quickly, and it's
Yeah.
pulling all of that information and actually using a ton of data to make that decision. But you are not able to comprehend that that's what it's doing, right? And
Right. Absolutely.
yeah, and so that speaks to me a ton, and it makes a lot of sense to me that even him coming from that data driven background, of all of that data in one way, shape, or form is actually in his brain. And so those feelings of I should do this, that's where they're coming from.
Yes.
Now,
Exactly.
yeah, and so I'm curious, because what I tend to do a lot, I feel like, is call it over intellectualize, my intuition,
Mhm.
of talking myself out of it, feeling inside of I should do this, I shouldn't do this, whatever, feeling that intuition very strongly sometimes, but then going, no, that's stupid. Why am I thinking that way? Or, well, actually, it'll be this, or overlooking it, not taking it into account. And so, what have you found for people that how do you help them, or how can somebody better tap into their intuition and actually listen to it? What have you found when you've looked into that?
Sure. And so let's first look at the science as to why we do that. And so the first thing is, when you have the neurons hitting the first place, which is your amygdala, that's where intuition hits, boom. And so you automatically know. The next place it goes is to your frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is the rational part. This is now we're getting into language, and logic, reason. And so, and for some of the bigger decisions, even though your intuition is saying, as you say, I should be doing this, we try and rationalize it. We think it, because it's a big decision. In some cases, the dots have to connect, but that's an afterthought. Okay. And so what happens is, a lot of times when we don't trust that feeling, or we don't trust ourselves, and it could be just our own values, or we're putting too much trust in the data, too much trust in other people's opinions, too much trust in societal norms. When we're kind of weakened by that, there's four intuitive hurdles that come and squash your signals and get you to doubt yourselves. And I'll go through them pretty quickly. One is being way too emotional. So in relationships, we use self-talk and we think we're giving second chances. Intuition's already given second chances. This is when you're giving fourth, fifth, sixth chances. You know you should be out of that relationship, but you don't. You stay in. being too rational, which means following societal norms, like I did with engineering. As a rational East Indian male, that's what I do, even though my intuition is saying you're meant to be an entrepreneur. The third is ego, and there's two sides to ego. There's the narcissism part, and there's following the herd. So when you have people in your circle and you're there because they wear certain brand names, or they're part of a certain clique, or they're famous, or there's something that's drawing you to people that you, or a person that you shouldn't be associating with, but you do. And what happens is now you're putting your values in their hands. It's their values you care for, not yours. And the fourth one is a big one. Is called fear of change, fear of failure, fear of the unknown. And the thing with fear, especially when it comes to the primitive part of your brain, is that when you have that fear, the primitive part of your brain is either you're going to be eaten by a saber-tooth tiger, or you're just going to take the right decision. It's binary. And so when we fear, it's because it's in a direction that we don't think we have the skills to go into. We don't think we can do it. But remember, the experiential intuition part has already gone to the subconscious area of brain. And when it says this is a positive signal, that's telling you why are you fearful? If your intuition knows you've got the raw skills to move in that direction, then move in that direction, right? And one of the best stories I can give you is David Dame, he's had cerebral palsy all of his life in a wheelchair. And he got a chance to finally go on a beach. Took a holiday with his wife and some friends. And he said his dream was just to feel the sand once in his toes. And so he got a chance. They wheeled him up to the sand water barrier and wanted to actually step in the ocean. So he stands up and he falls flat on his face. And the fear comes in, the embarrassment comes in. And he says, Sunil, I have two things I can do. The one is I can succumb to that fear, and I can sit back in that wheelchair and forever regret that I was never able to trust my intuition to walk in the water. And till I die, that's the regret. Or I can battle that fear that I have, and I can take one step into the water, and then I can take another step, and I can take another step. And that's exactly what he did. And he points to, and I'm pointing now to my neckline, he gets to where the water gets up to the chin. And that's when he turns back. And he just didn't realize how far he came. So when it comes to intuition, the fear, this is where you battle that fear, because if you're getting a positive signal, then you move ahead and you keep going, and you don't have goals that you're looking to extrinsically. I got to have that big house. I got to have that Ferrari. Intrinsically, that's not what you should be motivated to. I'm not saying those are great goals if that's what you think success is, but whether you're reaching those goals for the right reasons or the wrong reasons. And you can tell anybody, but you yourself, your intuition knows exactly what your intention is. And so when people take the time to really figure out what those positive and negative intuitive signals are, that take inventory. And I have there's a free 7-day challenge, by the way, on my website that takes you through that, where I take you through a proprietary 7-step process to get your inventory of positive intuitive signals are. Then you never second guess yourself. Now, if you want to take the time to confirm it, absolutely, because over time, especially if you haven't trusted your intuition, then it's going to take you time to get used to, well, that's a signal. It feels right. I've never done stuff that feels right, especially that if you're a lot more rational, because that's nuts. How can I do that? Yet when you do, then it gets easier and easier over time. And for those who haven't trusted their intuition, or have failed, or look at some traumatic events, or do things that are outside the norm, that's the best time to make changes. When you get that fear, that uncomfortableness, let's go again from the scientific basis. We talk about brain plasticity, or the ability to do things or break habits. And so the brain becomes what they call plastic, that's ready to change. So what happens is when you do something that's uncomfortable or fearful, or something that you're not comfortable with, what happens is your neurons actually separate a bit, and they're ready to form new pathways. But if you succumb to the fear and go back to the old ways of failing or going through hurdles and not listening to intuition, those neurons go back to the old pathways again, and you're back at the bad habits that you've had before. And so if you want to do it again, go outside, open those up, and then change. And when you change, those neurons are going to find new pathways. And because it's already led by intuition, it is the right decision. You're going to get some new experiences. You may have some new friends. You may open up another door of opportunity, but your brain is there with you. Your neurons are there with you. Your intuition's already there with you. You have all these basic friends, these tools of yours that are yours.
Mhm.
you're born with. Nobody else is giving you that theory or that formula or giving you their own two-step formula or their advice. This is you at the
Yeah.
core,
Yep.
creating your own success. And
Yeah.
so you don't need to go into some marketing mumbo jumbo or get sucked into somebody else's program or what have you if it doesn't resonate with you, because your intuition knows what resonates with you. And that's how you find success. It's really that easy, but it is also tough because it takes time, effort, energy, and really living in the present moment and not just talking about it. Right. A great case study I have is a friend of mine. He was actually my very first podcast guest. So he was in the mindset space.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm in the intuition space, so our worlds collided very well, and so we became real good colleagues. And he again, you were talking earlier about, we talk about intuition and mindset and live your life, and all these nice social media themes, and that he was about that, and he just didn't realize that. Yes, I live my life on intuition, absolutely, and it sounds really good in a nice crowd.
Yeah.
And then he saw me speak. And that's when I talked about the signals, the four types of intuition. And he said, wow, I didn't realize there's signals and four types. Wow, like this is really, really interesting. And then he developed a cough and he got a signal. He remembers an intuitive signal, said, go to the hospital.
Mhm.
And I said, just a cough. What are we talking about? And then that cough gets worse. And he ended up getting COVID-19.
Oh, wow.
And he ended up in a New York hospital, fighting for a breath. And there was a life or death moment that he had, and one that he actually wanted to die. And it was crystal clear that his intuition came to him and said, you are not done. Your voice needs to be heard. Your work is excellent. He's doing some amazing things in New York with the school system that
Yeah.
needed to continue. It pulled him out. And 5 days later, he came to me and he was able to tell me the whole story. I was, again, first podcast guest to kick off my podcast series. And what he did realize is that he wasn't walking the talk. He
Yeah.
would talk about mindset. He would talk about living in the moment and stuff. Like he looked back and said, I wasn't even doing any of that stuff. And so that's the hard part. The hard part, it shouldn't be hard. It's not hard. We think it's hard. So I've got to be very careful of how I say this. You can live in the present moment. And that's what you got to do all the time, is really live in the present moment and take those step by step by step. Don't worry about the long-term goals. Don't worry about everybody else's expectations. The one thing I say is, this is my train, this is my track, and this is how fast I'm going. If you don't like how fast it's going or what direction it's going, get off at the next station. And if you continue to bother me, I'll kick you off myself.
Yeah.
And what happens is you start to self-select those people, again, those who surround yourself with, just like John Rothschild, his wife, right? If you listen to everybody else, uh, I mean, look at the opportunity cost here. I
Yeah.
mean, $2 billion,
Yeah.
and how many people did he hire, and how many customers did he help? Just to dine. I mean, it's unfathomable when you think about it from those terms. And so when you trust your intuition, you got to think about, if I don't take those steps, what doors of opportunity am I just blind to, that are going to open up to a nice set of friends? It's going to open up to another career. That's going to open up to, maybe better retirement, or a nice place to visit, or just living every day, getting up, or following another passion I've got that I can turn into a purpose and maybe turn that into a business. And take it. And people call that risks, but it's not risk. Risk is because you're using a word you're saying normal somewhere else. Therefore, what you're doing is a risk.
Yeah.
Maybe what if I say I'm normal and everybody else is risk less?
Yeah.
I mean, then what's wrong with everybody else?
Yeah.
And don't worry about that, right? Let me go on my path. You worry about yourself.
Yeah.
And if you want to be risk less and fall back and just stay at the last station because I'm on my train, that's the way to look at it.
For sure.
And
And
that's how you move it forward.
yeah, and I think about those seemingly insignificant choices that actually
Yeah.
turn out to be so huge, right? And for him, it was,
Yeah.
I want to start a business. Again, maybe seemingly insignificant. I want to try this out, right? And I'm gonna, pick this one bankrupt restaurant, and probably going into it, it's his first time, and thinking, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. It turns into $2 billion, right?
Yeah.
What could have been seemingly insignificant at the time actually turns into something huge. The other thing
Yes.
that, as you've been talking, a phrase comes up for me is, just because something's simple doesn't mean that it's easy, right?
Right.
It's simple to live in your intuition, to listen to what your body's telling you doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy, right?
Absolutely, yeah, because you're gonna get. I mean, those four hurdles are always going to be bombarding you, and they're going to try and chink at your armor if you're not able to catch them. There could be ones where you don't know, you haven't fully found out what your signals are.
Yeah.
You're putting too much trust in someone else that you get emotionally high with, and all of a sudden there's giving you opinions that straying you away from things. And we're not robots, right? We all have emotions that are going to fluctuate up and down. So the idea is to navigate that whole sea, and to make sure that more often you're trusting your intuition. When you don't, those are opportunities. Remember, that is going into the subconscious area of your brain, that your intuition is telling you
Mhm.
that it's not going to happen. And one of the common things that I think, not common, but some people say that intuition leads you down the wrong path, to teach you a lesson. And my thing is, intuition is never wrong. And I had Mark Metry. I don't know if your listeners know Mark Metry. He has the Humans 2.0 podcast series. He's
Okay. Yeah.
it's I think it's one of the top 100 on iTunes.
Yeah.
He came on my podcast show, to talk about intuition. And so Mark developed social anxiety when he was much younger,
Mhm.
and in high school he felt that he had to lie so much so that he almost took his own life. And
Wow.
so when we were talking about that incident, this is when he said, like, intuition sometimes leads you down the wrong path. And he felt that he needed to lie more and more. And when he lied so much, he lost so much of his identity that he feel that he didn't need to, didn't want to live. And he attempted to take his life. And so I let him finish that story. And whenever people tell me that story, I always think about which one of the four hurdles were the ones that actually kickstarted that bad journey. And what I told Mark is, actually, Mark, if you rewind this podcast interview, because I was listening intently to what he was saying, and I have done that. My teams actually look back to confirm this. When he starts talking about his story, he starts saying, intuition sometimes leads you down the wrong path. And I was in high school, et cetera, et cetera. And I knew I shouldn't have lied, but
Mm.
the moment that he said that, boom, I said, that's where your intuition was. So you even recounting that story have already acknowledged that intuition was telling you, and then you went dot 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 dot, and you almost took your life.
Yeah.
So that's exactly how it plays out. And so we have to be careful, not to and say that intuition led us down the wrong path, because in generally it's going to be one of those four hurdles, which
Mhm.
becomes a learning lesson anyways. As I said, when you have those caustic periods in life, your brain's right there with you saying, okay, how do we change this?
Yeah.
But it's important to note that intuition is never wrong. And so you just got to spend the time to get those signals in order.
For sure. And almost like mistaking where the intuition actually was, and then in his story,
Yes.
he thought the intuition was to continue lying. However, the intuition was actually at the very beginning where he said, I shouldn't have done this, but.
Right.
Um,
And again, so we're talking about the complexity of intuition again, because I don't think anybody's really kind of, opened the hood until now. And I've really found so much there that's really packed with a lot of information that it's quite complex. Right.
yeah,
And so I think in society, we're just more about, yeah, I trust my gut. Okay,
yeah.
what does that mean? So nobody's really asked that question until now. Right. And again, I'm the nerd asking, what does that mean? Right.
For
Right.
sure. And one of the other things I wanted to touch on was going back to what you were saying, where the people that are doing things for the wrong reasons, right?
Mhm.
Kind of those like planes, bottles and models and cars and whatever it might be. What do you typically say when people go, well, I know that I'm not doing it for the right reason and I don't care. I'm not going to listen. They almost consciously say, I don't care. This is what I want to do. And so I'm going to continue doing it. Like, have you seen, maybe specific consequences that you point back to, or is there something that you can do to help break people out of those patterns? And even, maybe coming from the angle of, it's somebody that and care about, and you can see that they're doing that. Is there, a way that you've seen others have been able to break through to those people?
Yeah, and so typically especially come to people to come to me on the one-on-one, or even I've got a boot camp, and this is one of the problems they want to solve. There's a couple of reasons. The reason why they want to do that is that because their values are so weak.
Mhm.
They've weakened their own sort of self-worth and their values for the sake of someone else or a traumatic event in the past. And that traumatic event has got them to just really stick the emotions over there back then. And it doesn't allow them to really kind of break free of that. Not you honor what happened in the past, but you kind of move on, past that. And when your emotions are kind of stuck over there, then it just really weakens your values. And then you get pummeled by, again, those intuitive hurdles. The other thing is, in some cases, some of those people are doing it to spite somebody in the past,
Yeah.
or to get back at something, or get back a situation, or prove people wrong. And so again, the power is in somebody else's hands. And so they spend the present moment and the future, proving to someone else that it has nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
And so that's the road they're on. So when they use that kind of language, I'm looking to, okay, what happened in the past that's got them to say that? Why are they defining their self-worth from somebody else's lens when they should be defining their self-worth from their own lens? And so when I work with those kind of people to really kind of write this, to say, okay, what's your lens? What are your values? What do you want? And they're willing to put the work in to change that, that completely changes everything. And then what happens is, then all the other people, they either let go, they can forgive, or they don't have to. It all depends on how they cope with it moving forward. But they start doing things for themselves. And again, we're not looking at magnanimous steps here. You're just trying to live happy
Yeah.
every single day. The magnanimity comes later,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes being magnanimous is not what you want to be, right? I mean, I've had one client who was a real estate person, and everything looked good. Big house, fence, 2 cars, in the ads, big being in the city that he's in, and wanted to kill himself, right? Because there was no sense of self-worth. Another fellow I interviewed, Steve Sims, we got on this topic about extrinsic motivation. He had a client that had 3 private jets, and he couldn't afford the 4th one. So he killed himself. And so now these are obtuse cases, but this is what could happen when you start putting the lens of your self-worth, the wants and desires of others, prove other people's wrong, because you're giving your values away to other people, and you have this hole, and you weaken yourself.
Yeah.
And when you weaken yourself, other people start taking advantage of you. I mean, there's the Debbie Montgomery Johnson lost over $1 million in an online scam because she had this hole, and a scammer came on, and just one ask after another. And she was also an ex-banker and an ex CIA special intelligence officer. So
Yeah.
this was not someone who didn't know that there were intentions behind this stuff. She fell prey because her values were gone, because her husband had died, and a big hole in her life weakened her values. And then all the wolves start coming out.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different things here. I think it's a general statement. It's really an individual thing to take a look at, but this is where you take stock of, okay, let's get back of, let's bolster our own values. What's our self-worth? What's our values? Forget about what other people expect. Forget about the stuff that we're trying to spite or what we're trying to prove. It doesn't matter. And I essentially had to do that with my dad. When I lost my dad's opinions, I didn't do anything to appease him. And our relationship came because he saw what I was doing later, and he appreciated what that was. And that's how we repaired our relationship, because I was being authentic to myself. He knew I was doing things I loved. It didn't matter what he wanted,
Yeah.
right? And if he agreed or not, it didn't matter. It never entered my brain.
Yeah.
I was doing what I'm doing, and that's how I teach my kids, and that's how I teach everybody else that wants to listen to me for a few minutes here and there.
For sure. And, like speaking from my experience, I think a lot of times it's very tough, and, they're very closely related of like intuition and call them unconscious drivers. Right. And so
Right.
in my journey, it was, that, self-worth was huge. And I talk a lot about it, of trying to gain self-worth through admiration of others. Right. And putting myself in spots and looking for professional achievement and whatever it might be, and realizing that it was never filling, that hole inside. No matter what I achieved, it wasn't good enough. And it
Right.
was very tough, because now looking back on it, I can see the differences in the feeling between an intuition and those unconscious drivers. However, a lot of times, when you're in it, when you haven't realized that that's what you're dealing with, or that's what's happening, that's what's motivating you, they can get blended. Like, well, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I feel the need to do it. And so therefore, maybe it's intuition, or maybe I should be doing it, as opposed to more of that intuition, where it's having that strong yes or no feeling. And because they're so closely related, it's so hard to untangle them. And for me, it took a ton of work, years of just work and diving into like that subconscious feelings of, oh, my motivation is coming from trying to gain self-worth. It's not coming because I feel that this is the right path for me to take.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And absolutely, and there's something that I call an intuitive medium. And again, those who take the 7 day challenge will go through this anyways. But what do you do that really kind of gets you to cut out the noise and sit and think? So when you were reflecting on those things, in your situation, where did you go to think about those things? So, for example, like I'll in the shower is a great place for me to reflect, particularly on strategy or personal relationships. Before I go to bed is one. When I drive long distances is another one. I can even have the radio on, but just the thoughts that come. And there's one where I book a room that overlooks Niagara Falls with my family, and even with some friends, and I can have kids screaming in the background. But when I look at like 34 floors up, I'm looking at the majestic Niagara Falls, just with the water coming down, the mist coming up. My intuitive thoughts just start coming, and things become really, really clear. And that's when you go back and really reflect on that exact dichotomy you're thinking about. Is this is about what my intuition is saying, and I'm going to hold this thought here. And so whatever that thought is, what's the signal associated with it? So if the thought is, do I want to get closer to that person, and it's a positive signal, okay, bring that person in closer. And it doesn't mean that they're going to stay there permanently. Their values may change. They may not be trusting their intuition. And their path is different. And so if their path diverges from yours over time, and that's starting to happen with my friends, some of my ex-friends as well, then you got to be able to pull away and not ignore your intuition, stay, because now they may be dragging you into an area of life that you don't want to get into because you've got this rope tethered to them when you should have cut it off from an intuitive perspective.
For sure. And, for me, it's same thing. Shower is a big one before I go to
Yep.
bed. Another one, interesting one for me, is actually when I'm working out. When I'm
Oh,
working
yep.
out,
Yep.
it's, it almost takes those inhibitions too, of like, because I'm
Yeah.
physically working my body and putting some mental energy into that, it almost removes those inhibitions. And I tend to do a lot of, that deeper thinking and
Yep.
clear thinking as well.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. And, one of the last things I want to touch on quickly here is, the idea and of how intuition plays into finding either your passions or your purpose. And for me, again, relating it back to my life, where because it's one of the biggest things that I struggle with, of putting a lot of pressure on, what is my passion, what is my purpose, what do I
Mhm.
want to be doing. I've done a lot of work, and I'm always curious to ask people about it. And what I've developed now is those the feeling when I know I'm not living a passion or a purpose, or I'm not in alignment. I have a very strong visceral reaction to it. It was just
Mhm.
last week where, I'd gotten a new job and felt every ounce of my being going, this is not where you're supposed to be.
Right.
And I listened to it, and, so I resigned to that job. And I have very strong feelings that way. However, I don't have those positive feelings of you're on the right track as much.
Mhm.
So that's just context on my life. But for you,
Yeah.
what have you found? How does intuition play into finding passion and purpose? And what are some of the things that you've seen people do to really listen to it, to put them on that path?
Yeah. So passion, and what I want to do is separate what passion and purpose is. So passion is what you love to do,
Yeah.
and purpose is the sort of the driving force and actually putting that into action,
Mhm.
and taking the steps to do this. And the best case I can give you again is another case study. And so if you look at the paintings behind me here, that's painted by my daughter. And so she had a real passion for art. She's been painting since she was 4 years old. And we went to India. It was in December 2018. And she saw these paintings that were beautiful, these postcards. And what she found out was that these were people who had no arms. And she goes, "Oh my God, Dad, like I want to do something for these people. Like, look at me and I'm painting. Look at these people. This is so beautiful." And the way they're kind of portrayed in India is not so great. And she goes, "But they're just normal people. They just want to express themselves and have joy." And so how do I do that? And now, so her purpose is starting to come in. And so I said, "Well, Avni, which is her name, obviously, I said, it's got to come from you." Right. It's that, and again, without saying intuition, because that's a bit too formal. And so 6 months later, she whips her head around, and I said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And so when it comes to your purpose, and I'll start the story again of what happens. But the purpose, when you're driven by a purpose, you actually take the actions to move yourself forward, and people around you come and support you, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life. And and you have this direction that you're going in that you know is the right direction, and then the only people that come in are the ones that support you, and you start to make things happen. And so when you have, and from a business perspective, when a business has purpose or the entrepreneur has purpose, the employees are rally around that purpose. That's why core values are so done wrong. Your customers feel the purpose, and that's why you're seeing brands get in trouble online. Because now customers or potential customers looking say, "Well, that's not what you said," and now you're doing something that goes against my values. I'm not buying your stuff, and more people are doing that. So this can happen in your personal life or your professional life. So 6 months later, my daughter Avni whips her head around, and I said, "What? Okay." She says, "I'm ready," and I had no clue what she was talking about. And so I said, "Ready for what?" Because we were playing a board game, right? I said, "Well, it's not your turn yet. It's your it's your other daughter's turn." So I'm thinking like, "Oh, is she trying to cheat? What is she trying to do?" But she goes, "No, Dad. I figured out what I want to do. I remember we went to India in December. Yeah, and I said, yeah, I'm ready." I said, "Okay, what are you thinking?" I'm going to sell my art. I'm going to do a fundraising event. I'm going to have a pop-up event where people with disabilities, illnesses can come. I'm going to provide them painting, and they can just for that one day express themselves to feel special, because that's how I want them to feel.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, 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 boom. And I said, okay. That afternoon, we looked at a couple of URLs. So we got heartification.com was a domain that was taken. The very next day, we have a Canadian nonprofit corporation. A couple of months later, she runs a fundraising event with a $2,500 target. She raises over $5,000, sells all her originals in the first hour. And we even had someone from Scotland FaceTiming to buy her paintings. 2 months later, we have a pop-up event. And this is where the purpose comes in. So we had one fellow there who had Parkinson's disease, and he had found out about the event, and his arm, if those are watching, is just shaking. His left arm shaking violently. He says, "Avni, come here. This is what your event is doing." He dips his paintbrush into the paint and puts it on the canvas, and his arm stops, and it just opens up. And he says, "This is what your event is doing to me."
Wow.
The purpose brought all those people around there together. The purpose brought the person who sponsored the event, also gave her some stuff. People bought her paintings. She's now in over a year and a half raised over $30,000. That's her purpose. She's 14.
Yeah. Crazy.
She started this when she was 12, right? All her decisions, all based on intuition, all based on purpose. And she continues to get money and get some people who are happy. So even her friendships, so the friends that she has around her, are also, she uses her intuition to figure out who they are. The people who buy her story, her purpose, what she's doing, it has nothing to do with the money.
Yeah.
It has everything to do with what her purpose is. And so when you have that story about you, even in your personal life or in your professional life or in business, that's how it just becomes a suck for all the right people, because intuitively you are on a high. And that's how you want to live in life every single day, surrounded by those type of people. And that's the direction you want, which is confident as you move ahead. And boy, I mean, that's the way to live life, right? And I always tell my kids, I can die tomorrow with a smile. I mean, they get mad when I say that, but I say I can die tomorrow with a smile on my face, because every single day I live my life trusting my intuition or with purpose, and I'm doing exactly what I want to do, and I'm helping as many people as I can every single day until I die. And I think that's just a fantastic way to live life.
I love that. And thanks so much for sharing that story. It's
No
really
problem.
amazing. So we are wrapping up here. I wanted to see if there's anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to talk about. I know you brought up the 7-day challenge.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit quickly here and let people know how they could get involved with that?
Absolutely. So they go to intuitionology.com. There's a couple of links there for the 7-day challenge. And essentially what I do in the 7-day challenge is I take them through a proprietary 7-day step. And so they select a problem that they haven't solved in the past, what it means to them. And the first thing they do is they figure out what their negative intuitive signals are. So what didn't work in the past. And it's important to get that inventory first, because so the 7-step process I have them go through is very important. So once they get their negative intuitive signals, then we were talking earlier about going in the shower and things like that. They figure out, okay, put themselves in this intuitive medium and figure out, okay, how am I going to solve this problem? Mm-hmm. And that's when the positive intuitive signals come. And so the important thing about learning about the negative signals first is because if you start to insert a path that's not the right one, now you know your negative intuitive signal is going to say, that's not the right one. And so you pull that out. And so when you're done with the path of how you're going to solve that problem, it's driven by your positive intuitive signals. The next thing you do is you surround yourself with the people that are going to solve that problem. specifically. It could be your best friend or maybe not. It could be a mentor. And then what environment you change, and then you solve your problem by taking action. And in those 7 days, I actually measure your intuitive strength at the start and at the end. I've had over 54,000 people through. 100% of the time, their intuition has gotten strengthened. And while you're going through that, I have two case studies of people who volunteered to go through the tasks with you. One is someone who actually sold his house using the 7 day challenge. He
Okay.
started off in the day one. He used to almost get caught with someone who said, "You're going to sell this. It's $20,000 below. I'm sorry. This is the only thing that's," and he used to be a pushover. Okay, okay, okay. Just let me sign. So he almost would have signed for 20,000 under asking price. And at the end of the 7 days, he actually had a bidding war and he settled on $50,000 over asking. That's a $70,000 decision. 10
Yeah.
grand a day is not bad. And the other person who is just an absolute, I mean, she is just in love with what I'm doing and all that. This was someone who was a witness to a homicide. Her boyfriend had actually murdered their friend. She was asked to come to the apartment. He closed the door, locked the door behind her. She's coming to the apartment. There's blood everywhere. He puts a knife to her back, and he says, "You're next." So her intuition settles down and watches him. This is now where relational intuition is watching him to not make sure he doesn't get triggered. He assaults her, chokes her, breaks some blood vessels, asks her to wipe up the blood, which she refused. And then her intuition finds a moment where she can escape, runs to the door, unlocks it, runs 18 flights upstairs down, calls 911, and obviously lives. And she suffered a lot from PTSD, depression, anxiety. And she used the 7 day challenge to minimize it, didn't get rid of it. But what she learned in those 7 days is that she can go back to the gym, and that's where we call it intuitive medium was. That's where she can really kind of settle down and really kind of soak up life. She also started to learn how to trust people. And she's been using sort of the 7 day challenge as a template moving forward. So if somebody like John Harris, who sold his house, and Ashley Michelle, who witnessed a homicide, went through that horrific incident, can go through the 7 day challenge and find a solution to a problem, you can absolutely find a solution to whatever problem that you have. And even if you don't want to dive any deeper with me, you have a template. This is a downloadable PDF that you can fill in. Just copy it. Just start another problem, and go. It's free, and you get a copy of my ebook, Gut for free. You now have the resources to make every single decision the right one. Just take it and run. I mean, you don't even have to know who I am, and that's the 7 day challenge.
Awesome. And for people that want to connect with you or follow you, where would be the best place for that?
Yeah. So there's obviously intuitionknowledge.com. I've got intuitionknowledge.com/podcast. That gets me to the podcast series. And I'm also on iTunes, Spotify, Deezer, Google, all the major apps. There's Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'm going to try TikTok. I'm not going to dance because if I do dance, everybody's intuition will definitely have a negative signal watching me.
Yeah.
So yeah, connect me there, DM me. Happy to answer any questions for sure.
Awesome. I wanted to thank you so much for this conversation. And the last question I have for you, I ask everybody who comes on is,
Yeah.
what does the next phase of your journey look like?
The next phase of my journey is to really affect as many people as I can, much more so. And it's already happening. I see the wave coming in. I'm getting busier, a lot more requests. And so the journey has started even more so. It's been accelerating probably in the past 6 or 7 months. COVID's really accelerated that. And I'm just going to continue to do exactly what I'm doing now. It's just to help people get in touch with their signal, their intuition, their experiences, their phenomenon, so that they can make their decisions based on intuition, so that they can find the success that they deserve.
Amazing. Thank you again. We'll connect soon. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.